It's time to sit back, relax, and listen to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life will inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. Change your attitude, change your life. And now, here's your host, Joan Herman.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life brings you interviews with some of the most inspirational and influential people in the world. It's our goal to educate and empower you so you can live your best life now. Thank you for taking time for yourself, and thank you for letting us be a part of your life. We have another great show for you today. Joining me is Gregg Braden, a New York Times best-selling author, geologist, and pioneer known for bridging science and spirituality. He's here today to help answer the fundamental question, how do I make everyday life better for myself and for my family? Gregg is the author of 11 award-winning books, including The Turning Point, Deep Truth, The Divine Matrix, and his latest, Resilience from the Heart. Welcome, Gregg. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Joan, I'm thrilled to be with you. I'm really excited to be with your audience, our audience today. It's my first interview for 2016, so you're my number one here.
Well, that's great. I like being anyone's number one whenever I can. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. It's a good way to start the year, isn't it?
It's a great way. And I'm so happy to have you back on the show because, you know, Gregg, today we are living in an extremely stressful time. We have serious economic issues, security concerns. It's a crazy political arena. We have a lack of trust in leadership, and people are angry and hungry and searching. And we're going to talk about these stressors and what we can do to make a shift that can help create optimal health in this stressful world. So you write about heart-based resilience. What does this mean, and how does it apply to everything I just mentioned?
Well, I couldn't have encapsulated the world better than you just did. The best minds of our time are, in fact, telling us we're living what's being called a time of extremes. It doesn't mean only bad things are happening, or even good things for that matter, but it means really big changes in the world, and that means big changes in our lives. We can no longer separate our everyday lives from what's happening in the big world around us. And while we cannot necessarily control what happens in the world, we have a whole lot of control over how we respond to it. So the bottom line is, the better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to embrace whatever change life brings to our doorstep, Joan. And that's a combination of new discoveries regarding the human heart are telling us. One of the new discoveries is 40,000 specialized cells called sensory neurites have been discovered in the human heart, clustered in a way that is actually being called the little brain in the heart. These are brain-like cells, but they're in the heart. They have the ability to think independently of the brain in our head. They can learn, they can remember independently of the brain in our head. So there is one study that is happening right there about how we can apply our access to these cells in our lives. But where this gets really exciting, Joan, is I'm a scientist. I've been trained as a scientist, and we've always heard that the brain's where the action is, and science tends to neglect the heart, while the new thought audience tends to say, and very creative people, to say it's all about the heart, forget about the brain. Now we know that both of those ways of thinking are incomplete. It is the union of the heart and the brain, two separate organs, but a single powerful neural network between the heart and the brain that really give us the ability to embrace big change in our lives. When we can harmonize our heart and our brain together, the benefits that come from that, they include the activation of anti-aging hormones in our bodies, super immune response in our bodies, direct access to the subconscious to be able to heal patterns that are no longer working for us, deep states of intuition, and resilience, greater resilience to change in our world. So all of those benefits and more come from our ability to tune and harmonize our heart and our brain together. And the techniques to do that are deceptively simple. It's about breathing. It's about where we place our attention and our focus and the length of time that we do these things. And it is a marriage of what has been discovered in the laboratory and what I've learned by spending time with ancient indigenous peoples, the monks and the nuns in Tibet and Nepal and Peru and Bolivia and Egypt and all through the American desert Southwest, Aboriginal traditions, as different as they are from one another, the common through line is they all say that our mastery of our lives in this world begins in our heart, not necessarily in our brains.
Well, Greg, do you think not understanding that, not practicing the things that you're talking about, do you think that's why so many people have a void within that they're really trying to fill? They're trying to fill it with all the wrong things. Do you think that's why?
I think it certainly contributes, Joan. You know, science is a relatively new way of thinking of ourselves in the world. It's only about 300 years old. And as good as science is, and I'm trained as a scientist, I believe in science, it's served us, but we all know that science is incomplete. It doesn't have all the answers, and there are big gaps and glaring inconsistencies in the scientific story of us and our world on the one hand. And on the other hand, for 5,000 years, our ancestors, those who have come before us, they didn't know science, but they understood life. They understood their relationship to their bodies and the world in a way that worked for them and their families and their communities. So my question, when I was in the corporations and working as a scientist, is we've always been trained to separate these two things. And I think that separation leads to the emptiness that you're talking about, Joan. And my question was, what if we don't do that this time around? What if, rather than choosing science or spirituality, and I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about deep spiritual traditions about us, our relationship to ourselves, to one another, to the earth, to the cosmos, some of the biggest questions of human experience. What if we, rather than choosing one path or another, what if we marry the two great ways of knowing, science, the best science of the modern world, and the wisdom of 5,000 years of human experience into a wisdom that's more than science can be all by itself, or it's more than the spiritual traditions can be all by themselves? Where will that lead? Will it give us the evolutionary edge to meet the kinds of stress and the kinds of challenges that we're seeing in our world that we simply don't have a good guidebook to lead us through? We're in uncharted territory here. We've never seen the kinds of changes we're seeing in our world today. And what we're finding is that this marriage, I'm just going to say it, this marriage of the science and the spirituality, it's answering questions that help to fill that void, and in doing that, empower us with a mastery in our lives. When we have the ability to transcend the stress in our lives, you know, we don't know what's going to happen in the world, but we do have the ability to determine how we respond what happens in the world. And the better we know ourselves, the better we can deal with what life brings to our doorstep. And I think that's the through line for everything that we're talking about here.
And Greg, isn't it true that we, as a collective, a society, we drive a lot of the things that are happening within the world through our collective energy? So, for example, years ago, you were on the show and you talked about post 9/11 and how there was an energetic shift because everyone was experiencing similar emotions after that horrific event. So now, if we all tend to focus on those negatives that I opened the show with, all those, you know, the negative emotions, the things that are going on within our world, collectively, if we're focusing on the negative like we are through media and various sources like that, aren't we driving more negativism because of that?
You know, the way it's stated scientifically is that we tend to experience what we identify with. So we have to be honest with ourselves. There is a lot of change, and there are some bad things happening in the world. What we don't often hear, Joan, there's a lot of really good things happening. And as a scientist, what I can say is we've already got the solutions to all the big problems, the technological solutions in the world. We've got all the food we need to feed every child, every man, every woman on the face of the earth. It's not the lack of food that is the reason that people are going hungry now. We have the technology to bring electricity into every home that wants it without the use of fossil fuels, creating zero greenhouse gases. We've had it for over 60 years. We know how to build a thriving economy based on cooperation rather than competition. We already know how to do this. We know how to build sustainable communities. Northern Arizona, 600 people living together in a community, 100% of their own food and their own electricity are generated, and they have a 100% employment rate because everyone that wants to works helping to support the generation of the power and the growing of the food. And this is happening in many places throughout the world. We already have the answers to the big questions. And when I say that to people, they say, well, where are these things in our world now? Why aren't we seeing them? And that brings to light what I think is probably the greatest crisis and it's a crisis in thinking. We're trying to solve the problems of a 21st century world that we've never seen before through a way of thinking that we now know is unsustainable. And this is why we've got to think and live differently, perhaps more so now than any time in the past. The science gives us the reasons to make that shift. So it's not just on blind faith. The science is telling us about the deep relationships we have with our world, with our bodies, with one another, and overturning some of Darwin's ideas, not all of them, but some of them, including Darwin's belief that nature is based upon this model of competition and conflict. The new science, peer-reviewed studies, are now showing us that nature is based upon cooperation and mutual aid, not competition and conflict. So in this time of extremes, when the old ways, the unsustainable ways are no longer working, we have new ideas, and we've got the technology, got everything we need to meet these changes. It's about our willingness to make room for them in our lives, to make them a priority in our lives.
So, Gregg, if you could sum up everything you teach, what's the takeaway?
I just want to say I've never been more optimistic about our nation, about any nation, about the world, because now we know what doesn't work. I'm a huge fan of Buckminster Fuller. Before he died, he said something that has been a guide stone in my life. He said, "You'll never change the world by fighting against the things that you don't like." He says, if you want to bring about change, find a new way of doing things that makes the old way obsolete, and the old way will simply fall away. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And if we can bear that in mind, now that we know we have these solutions, all we have to do is make them a priority in our lives, make room for them in our personal and our collective lives, and then we don't have to fight the old systems. People just stop doing things the old way, and it just doesn't make sense anymore. And I think that is perhaps one of the most powerful agents of change that we have in our lives today. The better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to deal with whatever life brings to our doorstep, and I think that's the key.
The book is Resilience from the Heart by Gregg Braden. If you would like to learn more about Gregg or about his book, you can visit his website, greggbraden.com. That's Gregg, greggbraden.com. Gregg, I knew our time was going to go by very quickly, and I just want to thank you for being here, and I really do encourage our listeners to check out your website.
Oh, thank you so much, Joan. Thank you for making this conversation possible. I think it's a really important conversation to have. Have a beautiful 2016 to you and all of our listeners. We appreciate you all tremendously.
We'll be right back. Hi, this is Joan Herman, host of Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. Did you know that Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life has a free monthly digital magazine that can be read online or emailed to your inbox? Every month, nationally recognized leaders in their field provide information to educate, inspire, and motivate you. We believe in a holistic approach to life, incorporating mind, body, and spirit. Check out a copy of Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life 24/7. Visit cyacyl.com and be sure to tell your friends. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you found the show informative. At Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, we believe that knowledge is power. Take what you've learned, apply it, and live your best life now. Remember that the information provided are the opinions of our guests and should never replace the advice of a professional who knows your personal situation. If you'd like more information, visit our website, cyacyl.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on the site, listen to past shows on demand, read the digital magazine, and be sure to follow the show on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, this is Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.